started with the applicant's case, are there any preliminary matters that we need to discuss before we get started?
Yes, the company and the public staff are finalizing the partial settlement and stipulation, and we hope to have that up here for the parties to see in writing, hopefully within the next half hour or so.
Okay. Any preliminary matters from any other parties? Okay, seeing that, so what we're going to do is we're going to start with the applicant's case, and my understanding is that it's going to be DEC witness Suez.
Correct.
And then my hope and expectation is that the settlement agreement will be in this hearing room before we move on to DEC's next panel, so that everyone will have an opportunity to look at the settlement agreement. We had certainly hoped and expected to have had the settlement agreement finalized and prepared and provided to the commission and all of the parties in advance of the beginning of the hearing, but that hasn't happened, so we'll get it to everyone as soon as possible.
Thank you.
If I may, Commissioner.
Yes, would you like to?
Yes, I just wanted to give you an update if that would
Right.
be helpful. So we're working on execution papers now. Apologies and thank you for your patience. And we should have hard copies in the next 30 minutes.
Okay, within the next 30 minutes. And as a preliminary matter about the settlement agreement or the stipulation, did DEC and the public staff provide information, work papers, any information, documentation to the other parties so that they have detailed information about what is included in the settlement agreement or stipulation?
Yes, last night we provided KUKA, SIGFR, and State's Council with a summary of the core terms as well as relative work papers and added some references there. And I did confirm receipt.
Okay. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead with the hearing and the cases with DEC.
Thank you. I apologize. Is that better? Okay. The company would like to call Mr. Suez to the stand, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Swales. I'll begin by swearing you in. Please place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand. And do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Suez.
Good afternoon.
Or it is afternoon. We've done that again. Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and business address for the record?
Yes, my name is John Suez. My business address is 526 South Church Street, Charlotte, North Carolina, 28202.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Duke Energy Carolinas as Managing Director of Trading and Dispatch.
Did you cause to be pre-filed in this docket on February 28th, 2023, 14 pages of direct testimony and 4 exhibits?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your direct testimony or exhibits?
I do not.
If I were to ask you the same questions that appear in your direct testimony today, would your answers remain the same?
Yes, they would.
Did you also cause to be pre-filed in this docket on May 5th, 2023, 7 pages of supplemental testimony?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your supplemental testimony?
I do not.
And Mr. Suez, if I was to ask the same questions that appear in your supplemental testimony today, would your answers remain the same?
Yes, they would.
Did you also cause to be pre-filed in this docket on May 18th, 2023, 4 pages of rebuttal testimony and 1 exhibit?
Yes, I did.
Did you have any changes or corrections to your rebuttal testimony or exhibit?
I did have changes and I corrected those in the revised, corrected the testimony as well as the 1 exhibit in the revised rebuttal testimony submitted on May 26th.
If I were to ask you the same question that appear in your rebuttal testimony today, acknowledging the edits you made on May 26th, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would in conjunction with my revised rebuttal testimony.
Did you also cause to be pre-filed in this docket on May 26th, 3 pages of revised rebuttal testimony and 1 exhibit?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your revised rebuttal testimony or exhibit?
I do not.
And if I were to ask you the same questions that appear in your revised rebuttal testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Commissioner Kimmerer, at this time, I move that the pre-filed direct testimony, supplemental testimony, rebuttal testimony, and revised rebuttal testimony of Mr. Suez be copied into the record as if orally given from the stand.
So the direct testimony filed on February 28th of 2023 consisting of 14 pages. The supplemental testimony filed on May the 5th, 2023 consisting of 7 pages. The rebuttal testimony filed on May 18th of 2023 consisting of 4 pages. The revised rebuttal testimony filed on May the 26th of 2023 consisting of 3 pages will be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand. The 4 exhibits that were attached to the direct testimony, the 1 exhibit attached to the rebuttal testimony, and the 1 exhibit that was attached to the revised rebuttal testimony will be marked for identification purposes as pre-filed.
Thank you. And Mr. Suez, did you prepare a summary of your testimonies?
I did.
And Commissioner Kimmerer, if there are no objections, I ask that Mr. Suez's summary of his testimonies be copied into the record as if orally given to the stand.
Yes, the summary of his testimony will be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you. Mr. Suez is available for questions.
No questions from the public staff. Thank you.
Sayce has a couple questions for witness Suez. Bye. Good afternoon, Mr. Suez. Panache Megger appearing on behalf of Sayce. Just have a couple questions for you today. Mr. Suez, as you note in your direct testimony, the coal and natural gas markets experienced a significant degree of volatility during the test period. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
Indeed, the increase in coal and natural gas fuel commodity prices was one of the primary drivers of the $998 million under recovery at issue in this proceeding.
I can't speak to any calculations done that say how much of the recovery was due to the increases fuel prices, but I suspect a large portion of it was.
Referring to pages 8 and 9 of your direct testimony, you would agree, and I'll wait until you get there.
I'm there.
So again, referring to pages 8 and 9 of your direct testimony, you would agree that much of the increase in coal commodity prices during the test period was due to, let's say, supply and demand dynamics.
That's fair, yes.
And indeed, you list some of those dynamics. I'm not going to go through all of them, but suffice it to say, some of them include inability of coal suppliers to respond to increased demand in the global markets for both steam and metallurgical coal, and labor and resource constraints limiting suppliers' operational flexibility. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Referring now to page 9, lines 10 through 13 of your direct testimony. And are you there?
I'm there.
Okay. You note that going into winter 2022, so this is December 2022 through February 2023, coal commodity prices remained at historically high levels in part because of the rise in production costs. And I'm paraphrasing here, continued projections of high short-term domestic and foreign demand as a result of higher natural gas prices. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. In respect to natural gas, and I'm referring here to page 10, lines 6 through 7 of your direct testimony, and I'll wait until you're there.
I'm there.
Okay, you state, and I quote, natural gas prices are reflective of the dynamics between supply and demand factors, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So not to put too fine a point on this, but coal and natural gas prices, they fluctuate in large part because of, let's say, fundamental supply and demand dynamics. Is that right?
That's fair, yes.
And as a general proposition, would you agree that as a result of these dynamics, coal and natural gas prices are frequently volatile?
Yes, I would agree with that.
And ultimately, customers are on the hook for that fuel price volatility as they're responsible for paying for any fuel and fuel-related costs that the commission ultimately determines were reasonable and prudently incurred.
The company works very hard to minimize fuel costs within our ability, including a lot of the stuff I described in my testimony. Ultimately, to some degree, yes, we are a price taker effectively of, what the markets are, but we do our best to maintain as lowest cost as possible within a reliability, recognizing the fact that we need reliability of fuel security as well.
Okay. So you mentioned on think beginning page 12, and this kind of relates to what you just said in your response. This is page 12 of your direct testimony. Some of the steps that DEC is taking to ensure a cost-effective, reliable fuel supply. And I think with respect to coal procurement, again, this is not a inclusive or completely inclusive comprehensive list, but those steps include, but are not limited to, a mix of term, contract, and spot purchases of coal, staggering coal contract expirations, and diversifying coal sourcing, right?
That's correct.
And then with respect to natural gas, those steps include periodic requests for proposals, shorter term market engagement activities, financial natural gas hedging, and companies' firm transportation.
That's correct.
Okay. But notwithstanding these steps, DEC ultimately experienced a $998 million under recovery in the test period.
Again, I can't attest to what all the under recovery was for, but as I said, I suspect that much of it was due to the fuel price increase during 2022.
Okay. Now, in your supplemental testimony, of course, you note certain steps DEC is taking to optimize its coal spot market purchases. I think specifically for the purpose of making sure that its unit commitment and dispatch policies sort of incorporate sort of the best sort of pricing. Is that a fair summation?
So I would, basically, this is the dynamic dispatch is what we're calling it. It really incorporates more about the price input, the coal price input. It goes into our models that we use for unit commitment and dispatch purposes.
Yeah. But apart from sort of that recommendation in your supplemental testimony, you propose no sort of specific additional steps or modifications to the company's, current practices to ensure a cost-effective, reliable fuel supply.
I'd say this is a pretty big, it's a proactive improvement to how we manage our unit commitment and dispatch process. And it's not reactionary, it's proactive, meant to incorporate, kind of a way to make sure we're doing the right thing for the customer and ensuring a minimal cost, but at the same time, ensuring that we have reliable fuel supply to our plants.
Okay. Moving on, are you aware of the commission's order in the carbon plan docket? Just generally aware of it?
Not, it depends on what in particular we're talking about, but probably not as aware. So I don't know. Is there a specific question?
Yeah, and it's just one question. Subject to check, at least would you agree that the commission, obviously subject to future CPCN proceedings, except for planning purposes, an additional 800 megawatts of CT capacity and 1,200 megawatts of combined cycle capacity?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I wasn't really involved in that. I'm not aware of that. So I can't really, I don't know anything about it. I'm sure we can check and find out, but I can't really say. I don't know.
Okay. Would you say, subject to check, that the commission at least approved for planning purposes additional or incremental natural gas capacity?
Again, I'm just not familiar enough with it to.
Okay, moving on. And just to close here, all things being equal, increasing the level of natural gas fired resources on the system would increase customers' potential exposure to natural gas price volatility.
I think if you burn more natural gas, you're naturally going to increase the exposure to a volatile price. Yes, and when we're doing, like I mentioned in my testimony, we have steps in place to minimize that. But ultimately, if you burn more gas, I don't see how you can't you would increase the volatility, not decrease it.
Okay. And renewables are fuel-free resources, correct?
They are certainly a fuel-free. Obviously, the sun and wind don't have a cost to it, but obviously, if you have a PPA, there is a cost to it. And there's a cost to build the resource, but the fuel itself, of course, ultimately is free. Yes.
Meaning that they don't have fuel price volatility.
That's fair.
Okay. So all things being equal, increasing the levels of renewables, I should say, on the system would decrease customers' exposure to fuel price volatility.
I haven't really thought about it that way. I'm not sure if I'd agree on just the premise, possibly, but I guess I haven't really thought through that as much as I probably should have. So I don't know.
Okay. No further questions.
Mr. Swez, I'm Marcus Trathan. I'm here on behalf of CUCA. Just technical question here. The Duke has filed a fuel procurement practices report in docket E100 sub 47A. Are you familiar with that?
I am not.
Okay. It's a report that purports, as it says in the title, to describe DEC's fuel procurement practices. You're not familiar with this report?
Are you referring to one of the exhibits in my testimony, or is this, I didn't understand when you said 4700,
I was just referring to a docket number.
It's not this case?
This is filed, it was, the last report I have is from December 22nd, 2014. So the first question is, are you familiar with the report? It's titled Fuel Procurement Practices Report.
So the only thing I can say is my exhibit one, the title is the same. It's Duke Energy Carolina's Fossil Fuel Procurement Practices.
Mhm.
So it's similar, but if it's not this, no, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay. And are you, I assume that you would not know whether or not the December 22nd, 2014 report is the latest report?
I would not know.
Okay, thank you.
CPRE has no questions for this witness.
No redirect. Thank you.
Mr. Swift, I just have one clarifying question about the stipulation of public staff, and I believe it's your exhibit 4. And in the stipulation, DEC has proposed changing the methodology for determining the total fuel cost to total energy cost from the 61% to the 75 to 85% ratio. Can you explain how that ratio works when the system sales fall outside of the 75 to 85%?
Sure. Excuse me, sure. So obviously the fuel proxy cost is meant to calculate what the fuel cost of a power purchase is based on the sales that we've made, since we know the components of the sale. If that calculation results in, say, a number below 75%, then the ultimate fuel cost proxy for that period is raised to 75%. And likewise, if the calculation results in a number greater than 85%, it's lowered back to 85%. If it's inside the range between 75 and 85, it just remains that calculation.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay. Questions? Okay.
No
From
questions.
DEC? Okay. Mr. Swez, thank you very much, and you may be excused.
Thank you.
Mr. Camera, at this time, I'd ask that Mr. Suarez's exhibits that were previously marked and filed with his testimony be moved into the record. We'll accept it.
Your motion is granted,
Thank
and the exhibits will be admitted into the evidence.
Thank you. At this time, the company would call Mr. Flanagan to the stand.
Good afternoon, Mr. Flanagan.
Good afternoon.
So I'll go ahead and swear you in. Will you place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand? And do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Flanagan.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm sorry. I'll get it right eventually. When you're ready, Mr. Flanagan, will you please state your name and business address for the record?
Yes, my name is Jeff Flanagan. I'm at 8320 North Carolina Highway 150 in Terrell, North Carolina.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Duke Energy, and I'm the general manager of Carolina's dispatchable generation, the West Zone. I have responsibility for Marshall and Allen steam stations, as well as W.S. Lee and Asheville combined cycle and Clemson CHP.
Did you cause to be pre-filed on this docket on February 28th, 2023, 11 pages of direct testimony.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you have any changes or corrections to your direct testimony?
No, I did not.
If I were to ask you the same questions in your direct testimony today, would your answers still be the same?
Yes.
Mr. Flanagan, did you also cause to be pre-filed on this docket on May 19th, 2023, 13 pages of rebuttal testimony?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your rebuttal testimony?
We did file on, I believe, May 26th to remark for confidentiality.
And if I were to ask you the same questions that appear in your rebuttal testimony today, would your answers still be the same?
Yes.
And as you noted, Mr. Flanagan, did you also cause to be pre-filed in this docket on May 26th, 2023, 13 pages of revised rebuttal testimony to remark for confidentiality?
Yes, that's correct.
And do you have any changes or corrections to your revised rebuttal testimony?
No, I did not.
If I were to ask you the same questions that appear in your revised rebuttal testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Commissioner Cameron, at this time, I move that the pre-filed direct testimony, rebuttal testimony, and revised rebuttal testimony of Mr. Flanagan be copied into the record as if orally given from the stand.
Mr. Flanagan's direct testimony filed on February 28th of 2023 consisting of 11 pages. His rebuttal testimony filed on May 18th of 2023 consisting of 13 pages, and his revised rebuttal testimony filed on May the 26th of 2023 that contains confidential portions consisting of 13 pages will be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you. And Mr. Flanagan, did you prepare a summary of your testimonies?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Commissioner Cameron, if there are no objections, I ask that Mr. Flanagan's summary of his testimonies be copied into the record as if orally given from the stand.
Seeing no objection, the summary of Mr. Flanagan's testimony will be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you. Mr. Flanagan is available for questions.
CPRE 3 has no questions for this witness.
I have no questions.
SACE has no questions for this witness.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Flanagan, would you agree with me that the W.S. Lee plant was not operational during Winter Storm Elliott?
That is correct.
And the case we're here about is the fuel expenditures for calendar year 2022, correct?
Correct.
So next year's fuel will be filed in early 2024 for the 2023 fuel.
Correct.
Okay. And so would you agree with me that W.S. Lee's non-operational status extended beyond December 31st of 2022?
Yes, that's correct. I believe it went through mid-January.
And mid-January of 2023 will be addressed in the fuel case that will be filed in early 2024.
I would think that 2023 portion of that would be part of the 2023 fuels case, correct?
I understand. Okay. I'd like to address just some of the scheduling issues that arose here. And if I could, Commissioner, I would propose to mark an exhibit as public staff Flanagan Cross Exhibit 1.
Shall be marked.
May I approach?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you now have a document in front of you marked Exhibit 1, 9 pages.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And let me just back up a little bit. You filed direct testimony in this case on February 28th.
I believe that's correct.
I did the same thing you're doing right now, so.
Yeah.
February
Yes.
28th?
Yes,
Okay. And then the public staff filed testimony on May 9th.
yes, that's correct.
That is 10 weeks, 70 days. I counted.
Okay.
Does that sound about right?
Yes, sir.
And you might agree with me that in those 10 weeks, some other things were going on involving the public staff and Duke Energy.
Duke Energy, I can definitely say yes. I don't know about the public staff, but yes.
I can say yes, but I'm
Yeah.
not allowed to testify. This data request here is dated March 27th. Exhibit 1.
Yes,
I've got a
that's
copy if
correct.
you need it.
Yeah, March 27th. I've got it.
And it's called outages. You'll see on the first page.
Correct.
And if you'll look with me on page 5 of 9.
Okay.
Public staff asked for a meeting, and on page 6 of 9 is the response from the company. Glad to have a meeting scheduled for April 14th at 11 a.m.
Yes, that's correct.
And we can skip ahead to page 9 and see that the subject of this meeting is going to be regarding Blues Creek and WS leak.
Yes, that's correct.
Technical SME discussion only.
Yes.
That means no lawyers, correct?
Yes, that's my understanding.
And if you look at page 8 of 9, you'll see that on April 12th, that meeting was canceled with a request to reschedule for the next week.
Yeah, I believe the request was to reschedule. Correct.
And then just for completeness, if we'll look at page 7 of 9, in your rebuttal testimony, you noted that the public staff said they were just too busy. And if you'll look sort of 3/4 of the way down, you'll see that single sentence from the public staff. Sorry for the delay in responding. At this time, we are just too busy to have this meeting.
Yes, I see that.
That was sent in response to the request for a
Reschedule.
rescheduling of the meeting that was supposed to happen on April 14th.
Correct.
And this is the email that you're referencing in your testimony.
Yes.
If you'll see, and I don't know how to tell you, but it's in the paragraph at the bottom of page 7. Public staff says that they would have expected to also have information on those. Do you see that sentence? If you just want to count the number of lines. 6, 7.
Yeah, and states that
Yep.
reports were not created for those. Is that? I'm
Yep,
not sure
you're
where
there.
you're at. Okay, yes. Yeah.
So, yeah. So you will see, you will agree with me that the public staff here is telling Duke that there's some information that they haven't received that they thought they would have received.
I believe that's correct. And I mean, I can't speak to what you're saying. I mean, I see what you say, but I guess I can't speak to the intent.
Thank you, I understand.
Yeah.
If I can have one moment.
Okay.
Thank you. I don't have any more questions, Mr. Flanagan.
Just a few redirect questions, if I may. Mr. Flanagan, in response to Mr. Freeman's questions regarding discovery the company provided, in your opinion, did the company provide, was the company responsive?
Yes, I believe over the course of the data request period, we received, related to these 3 outages specifically that they're talking about here, W.S. Lee and 2 at Blues Creek, 5 separate data requests with upwards of 150 questions that were answered, over the course of the about 2-week period towards the end of April.
And Mr. Freeman pointed you to, this is public staff's data request 7. If you recall, did public staff issue follow-up data requests in respect to our answers, the company's answers to public staff's DR?
Yes, that's correct. Data request 8, specifically on all outages, 21 and 22 were also, and 23 concerned Blues Creek. And there was actually a follow-up data request 30 that was submitted last week that I believe we responded Friday.
And with regards to Mr. Will's question, Mr. Freeman's question about their concern that they didn't receive certain information, could you give some background on the semi-annual data request?
Yeah, and it's my understanding that the company, what we are always asked to give in data requests is a outage reports, or whenever we do not have outage reports, a summary of the outage. That's been a long-standing history. We look back the last few years, and it's the same data that we've always supplied.
And if the semi-annual data request, is that issued before the start of the fuel discovery period?
That's my
or-
understanding. Yes,
Okay.
before.
And for, say, in regards to DEC, for the last 3 test periods, has that been the practice between public staff and the company?
Yes, that's correct. We've given them the same data, outage reports or summaries of outages where there's no report available.
Okay. And so just for clarity of record, when they ask for an outage report, does the company provide an outage report?
That's correct.
And where an outage report has not been created, what does the company do?
We summarize the outage and respond, usually in an Excel file.
And by nature of the fact that it's a semi-annual data request, we do this twice for each test year
Yes, that's correct.
and have done so for DEC for test year, this current test year?
Correct.
2022? And for 2021 as well?
Yes,
And for 2020?
yes.
And if you know, does public staff ask the exact same question for Duke Energy Progress?
I believe so, yes.
And has the company responded consistently with the practice which you have just outlined?
Yes, that's correct. Same response.
And if the commission establishes a discovery period as part of this, part of the fuel proceeding, is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
And did the company respond to formal discovery within the discovery period?
Yes, we responded, based on the date received, we submitted back in the required period. Yes.
And did the company make itself available for discussions with the public staff as it relates to the fuel proceeding?
Yes, and it's one thing I wanted to point out with the rescheduling of the meeting. The meeting wasn't canceled. We asked for a reschedule, and I believe provided my information, contact information, so that they could reach out to me independently if they needed to.
And did public staff respond with a different date they might be available?
No.
And did public staff respond indicating that April 14th was the only day they were available?
The email is all that I've seen.
And if you recall, any discussions with respect to the 3 outages in question that you may have had with public staff outside of discovery or?
So, specifically, I know we had I believe it was DEP rate case call concerning Asheville Station. And during that call, we talked about W.S. Lee's, the issues going on there, just because I had responsibility for W.S. Lee. So the conversation kind of went in that direction.
Thank you, Mr. Flanagan. I have no further questions.
I'll begin with a couple of questions from the commission. Talking about the outage reports, I think you just testified and then you talked in your rebuttal testimony that if the company has not prepared an outage report, that it will prepare a summary instead. Can you help us understand the reasons that DEC would not prepare an actual report for outages?
Yes, so our outage reports are, we have planned outages. If you look at kind of how we're structured, we have outage managers that manage certain larger, longer term outages. And outage reports are generally prepared for those planned outages that are planned well in advance. So, a year in advance, we have planned outages. Those outage reports are prepared for those outages that detail the scope of work and any other findings during the outage.
And for the unplanned outages, some of which occurred during the test year, does the company prepare outage reports after the fact? So actual reports as opposed to just summaries of what had happened?
No, so we don't. It depends on what the outage, kind of how the outage goes. So WS Lee, as an example, I believe there's an outage summary of the work that went on after the turning gear failure, as an example. Generally, depending on the type of failure, if it's a less common, more technical failure, we'll do a root cause. It may be internal. We may involve SMEs. We may involve OEMs like Siemens or GE and a gas turbine to provide a report, but they're more hindsight reports on technical issues that happened and not outage reports like would be prepared in planned outages.
Okay. And so just for clarification, which of the outages during the test year did DEC not prepare or have an actual outage report for?
I can verify, subject to check, but there are probably several.
Mhm.
Forced outages, maintenance outages, where we would not have done that.
Okay. And then I'll be asking the public staff the same question, but the public staff believes that they did not or do not have the information and documentation that they need in order to have completed their investigation about the outages and then provide a recommendation to the commission. Can you give the company's position about whether you provided the information that the public staff needed and they had what they needed in order to complete their investigation and prepare a recommendation? And I'll be asking the same question of the public staff.
Okay. Yes, I mean, I feel with the data that has been submitted, and it goes back to the 5, really 6 now data requests, 150 questions that we answered in the time allotted to get back to them, several follow-up questions, even up to the most recent data request that was submitted last week and returned last week. We've provided everything that we can possibly provide to the public staff to make a determination on those outages.
So you believe that you have fully answered and complied with their request for information?
Yes, that's correct.
Except for actually having an in-person meeting?
Correct, yes.
Okay. And then a question about the WS Lee outage. That outage occurred during December of 2022 and extended into 2023. And I think I heard that your position is that deferral from that outage should deferral to the next fuel proceeding should only be the portion of the outage that occurred in calendar year 2023, as opposed to the entire outage. Is that the company's position?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So the company does not believe that because the outage extended into 2023, that there's a basis for deferring it into the next fuel proceeding.
Correct.
Okay. Any further questions from the commission? Beginning with the chair. Okay. Commissioner Clodfelter.
Mr. Flanagan, just curious, the discovery request that you responded to last week, what was the subject matter of that request?
They were additional questions related to 2 Blues Creek outages, one in the spring and one in the fall, both on Blues Creek Unit 2.
On Unit 2, and they did not, did that discovery request address the outage at WS Lee between December and January?
I don't believe there were any questions related to WS Lee. I think they're all Blues Creek.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Commissioner Brown Bland.
Yes, just to clarify with the Public Staff Flanagan Cross-Examination Exhibit 1, page 7. There at the bottom. So, and you can take a minute to look at it, so you don't have to go with my short summary, but as I read that, it's an indication that the company had provided the public staff with a list of outages, and the summaries of them were, and indicated that the reports had not been prepared or created for those. And then the engineer for the public staff, Evan Lawrence, indicates but there were other outages and that he would have expected to receive information on. And did the company understand that before seeing this from him, that he was looking for other?
No, I don't believe so. My understanding from the request for outage reports, we feel like we submitted outage reports and summaries of outages. I think one of their data requests, we submitted the root cause for one of the outages, and I think they were taking that as an outage report, even though it was a hindsight analysis for a technical response for what happened. We don't consider that an outage report.
And then having received this statement from him, what was the response? I mean, did you indicate or have further conversations letting him know that you didn't think he had asked? Because he indicates here that maybe they need to revise the data request. Was that what the company was thinking too? Did you communicate back?
I think at the time we thought and still believe that we had given them all the information that we could on the outages, which was why, if they had questions on some of the data, I hate to assume, my assumption on the further questions were that they had some technical questions about what they had seen in the data request that we had already provided, and not so much have additional questions new. We thought it was just a technical explanation, which would be common with some of the other meetings that we had had.
Did you take this response as being somehow they weren't satisfied with what they had received, the public staff being?
I don't know that I thought about what their intent was at the time. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, questions on commission questions? Oh, excuse me. Commissioner McKissick has a question.
Just one or two quick questions, because there's been some discussion about a root cause analysis report that was previously done, and there one not being done in connection with this other incident. Is that correct?
For the 3 outages in question, the first outage in the spring of 2022, there was not a root cause. We did some internal investigating just to look for best practices and make sure that we wouldn't have an issue repeat itself. For the fall of 2022, there was a root cause. It was very technical. The WS Lee outage, the root cause is still ongoing with the OEM.
Still ongoing?
Yeah.
And the one, I'm looking at one here that was dated August 31st, I guess, of 22, Blues Creek Unit 2 crossover failure.
Yes, sir.
And when I go back to a summary of root cause, it says, based on the overall analysis, the root cause of the incident was the vendor's failure to apply Loctite. Loctite.
Yes, sir.
That's the way it's pronounced, yeah. Thread locker on the threaded rod and tie rod end fasteners during the Blues Creek 2 LP crossover its banking joint replacement project during the fall 2018 outage, and lack of thread lockers is evident. So was this basically the summary that they reached?
Yes, sir. That's the summary of the root cause that was done actually by a third-party metallurgical lab following the outage. Yes.
And that you accept that conclusion as being an accurate assessment of what occurred, or did you have reservations that it may not have been at that time, or that there were other causes?
Yeah, it's, when you look at the outage and, some of the other explanation in the root cause report, I think the first thing to point out is, it goes back to a 2018 outage when, the company replaced an expansion joint on that crossover. So it was actually shipped off-site and rebuilt by a third-party vendor and then shipped back, reassembled. The design had not changed prior to 1974 when the station was designed. So there was no change in design. And the tie rods that failed, when you look at the root cause, were original. They were tested and reused. I think once you understand that, it helps you better understand why the Loctite thread locker was the root cause. So you can't see that, right? The third-party vendor sends it back to us. There's multiple kinds of lubricant that can be used to install. In this case, it's a nut on a bolt. For all intents, it's just big. It's about 6 inches in diameter. So when that's reinstalled, there's different types of lubricant that can be used. You can't see what's Loctite versus what's a different lubricant. And without destructive examination, which is what we did after the failure, you wouldn't know that there was a design flaw. You wouldn't know that Loctite thread locker wasn't used. So I think having that background, once we understood how we got there, it's easy to understand the root cause and how they ended up with the lack of thread locker being the root cause.
And with that information, has it caused you to reassess using the third party who did the work on that particular occasion, or either to provide greater specificity in connection with the way they might conduct repairs in the future, or even maintenance if they're involved in that type of activity?
Yes, and this was a very special, so the 2018 outage was actually to replace the expansion joint on the crossover. So the crossover is, just to kind of put a visual on it, I'm going to say 20 feet long, 5 foot diameter. It's a large pipe that has an expansion joint so that when the unit's online and shuts down, it can allow for thermal expansion. There's an expansion joint in that system, so 5 foot diameter expansion joint. All of this is held together to keep it rigid, but allow for expansion by these tie rods and fasteners. And the expansion joint isn't something you can really replace in-house. So it had to be shipped off and performed by a third party. We verified that the specification that was listed said that this is what needs to be used, the Loctite thread locker. Part of the follow-up for this was making sure that, vendor contact, that we ensure they're following the processes and procedures that we supply them. But, we have to rely on the expertise of some of the third-party vendors. This isn't something we could handle in-house. So, we feel like we were prudent in the way we managed that. Especially knowing that it was the original design from the tie rod fastener standpoint. So,
Well, that's helpful to understand. So you all actually did specify use the Loctite, but the third party didn't use it.
yeah, the specification was sent, and yes. Yeah, and they actually NDE tested the tie rods to ensure that they were sufficient before sending it back to verify they were in good shape. So,
Got it. And I guess the thing moving forward, I guess, are there any actions that you would anticipate taking that would mitigate this kind of problem, or would you still use this same third party? I don't know how many other companies are out there capable of doing the work or providing the service that third party provided.
I don't know specifically on this instance. This is 2018. I'm not even sure they're still around, to be honest. I think we do still rely on third-party vendors to make repairs. We did follow with the lessons learned. We looked across the fleet, ensured there were, at least for this specific instance, ensured that there were no other units that had this type configuration. But specific to this vendor, I don't know that any follow-up action's been taken.
All right, thank you.
Okay, questions on commission questions?
Thank you. You would agree with me that the W.S. Lee outage report was provided to the public staff on April 10th. And that was in response to Public Staff Data Request 7.
April 10th, that's correct.
Thank you so much. I don't. Questions? No questions. Yeah. Good. Thank you. I don't have any more questions. Commissioners, we do have, and I don't know if the commissioners just received them, filed copies of the stipulation.
We did, and we'll move to that in just a minute. Questions from DEC on commission questions?
I apologize.
Yes. Thank you. No questions.
Okay. And before we move to the stipulation, I believe that DEC has already made its motions in regard to this witness, but public staff, do you have a motion you'd like to make in regard to the exhibit that you introduced? Okay.
Thank you. Public staff moves that the document marked for identification as Flanagan Cross Exhibit 1 be moved into evidence.
And seeing no objection, public staff, Flanagan Cross Exhibit 1 is admitted into the record. Mr. Flanagan, thank you for your testimony, and you may be excused.
Thank you.
So I believe that the next panel that will be called is going to be talking about the stipulation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Has the stipulation been provided to all of the parties at this point?
Does the commission have a
Yep.
copy?
We have copies.
I believe they're being, as far as I know, I believe that everyone's received a copy or is
Okay.
receiving a copy.
Okay. Then you may go ahead and call your next witnesses.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you. At this time, the company will call Ms. Clark and Mr. Bauer as a panel, please, to the stand. Sure. Yep. Thank you.
And Ms. Clark, before we begin, I have to apologize for mispronouncing your name yesterday. So please place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hands. And do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you.
And Commissioner Kimmer, if with your permission, I'd like to introduce their various testimonies that have been pre-filed, and then we'll ask for their testimonies and et cetera to be moved into the docket at the end.
Okay. Please
Thank you.
proceed.
Starting with you, Ms. Clark, will you please state your name and business address for the record?
Yes, good afternoon, members of the commission. My name is Sigourney Clark, and my business address is 5413 Sharon Harris Road, New Hill, North Carolina.
By whom are you employed in what capacity?
I am a rates and regulatory strategy manager for Duke Energy Carolinas.
Did you cause to be pre-filed in this docket on February 28th, 2023, 16 pages of direct testimony, 6 exhibits, and 13 work papers?
Yes,
Do you have any changes or corrections to your direct testimony or exhibits?
I did, and I addressed those revisions in my May 4th supplemental testimony, where I also filed revised exhibits and work papers.
And if I were to ask you the same questions that appear in your direct testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would when read in conjunction with my May 4th supplemental revised exhibits and work papers.
And as you indicated, Ms. Clark, did you also cause to be pre-filed in this docket on May 4th, 2023, 4 pages of supplemental testimony and 3 revised exhibits?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your supplemental testimony or exhibits?
No, I do not.
If I were to ask you the same questions that appear in your supplemental testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Ms. Clark, did you also cause to be pre-filed in this docket on May 18th, 2023, 21 pages of rebuttal joint testimony, which you co-sponsored with Mr. Bauer, and 2 exhibits?
I did, however, I addressed those corrections in my May 19th corrected exhibits and work papers.
It's okay. So just for clarity of record, you had some changes or corrections to your May 18th rebuttal testimony. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And if I were to ask you the same questions that appear in your rebuttal testimony today, with those corrections in mind, would your answer still be the same?
Yes, when read in conjunction with my May 19th corrected exhibits and work papers.
Did you also cause to be pre-filed in this docket on May 26, 2023, 5 pages of revised rebuttal testimony and 3 second revised exhibits, including work papers?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your revised rebuttal testimony or exhibits?
No, I do not.
If I were to ask you the same questions that appear in your revised rebuttal testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
And Mr. Bauer?
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Would you please state your name and business address for the record?
Sure. My name is Chris R. Bauer, and my business address is 525 South Tryon Street, Charlotte, North Carolina, 28202.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Duke Energy Business Services. The capacity is I am the Director of Corporate Finance and the Assistant Treasurer company.
Did you cause to be pre-filed in this docket on May 18th, 2023, 21 pages of joint rebuttal testimony, which you co-sponsored with Ms. Clark, and 4 exhibits?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your joint rebuttal testimony or exhibits?
No, I do not.
If I were to ask you the same questions that appear in your joint rebuttal testimony today, would your answers remain the same?
Yes.
And at this time, Commissioner Cameron, I ask that I move that Ms. Clark's direct testimony, supplemental testimony, rebuttal testimony, corrected rebuttal testimony, and revised rebuttal testimony and the associated exhibits, as they were pre-marked, be moved, would be entered into the record as if orally given to on the stand.
Your motion is allowed. So Ms. Clark's direct testimony that I believe contains confidential portions as well. So I'll make that note, filed on February the 28th of 2023, consisting of 16 pages with 6 exhibits and 13 work papers. Supplemental testimony filed on May the 4th of 2023, consisting of 4 pages with 3 revised exhibits. And then rebuttal testimony filed on May 18th of 2023, consisting of 21 pages and 2 exhibits and I believe 10 work papers.
That is correct.
And corrected rebuttal testimony, and then joint revised rebuttal testimony filed on May the 26th, consisting of 5 pages, will be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you. And Commissioner Cameron, at the time, I'd also move that Mr. Bauer's rebuttal testimony and exhibits be entered into the record as if orally given from the stand.
And your motion is allowed. Mr. Bauer's joint rebuttal testimony filed on May the 18th, consisting of 21 pages, and the joint revised rebuttal testimony filed on May the 26th of 2023, consisting of 5 pages, will be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you. And Ms. Clark, did you prepare a summary of your testimonies, including the summary of your joint testimony, which you co-sponsored with Mr. Bauer?
Yes.
Commissioner Cameron, if there are no objections, I ask that Ms. Clark's summary of her testimonies be copied to the record as if orally given from the stand.
And seeing no objection, the summaries of the testimony will be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you. Ms. Clark and Mr. Bauer are available for questions.
First, would you like to ask that the exhibits and work papers be marked for identification purposes?
I would, and I appreciate your help.
And so the exhibits and work papers that we just discussed will be marked for identification purposes as pre-filed. Okay, we'll move to cross-examination.
Yes, I believe I'll start from this side, if that's okay. Good afternoon, Marcus Trathan for CUCA. just a few questions really, and I believe they're all from Ms. Clark, but Mr. Bauer, feel free to jump in if the spirit moves. I'd like to just start with making sure I understand this exhibit correctly. I'm at Exhibit 6. I'm in your direct testimony. I don't know that it matters which version, but I'm in your direct testimony at Exhibit 6, Schedule 4, page 2.
Give me just a moment. Schedule 4, page 2.
That's correct.
I'm sorry, was that exhibit 3? Exhibit 6? Oh,
Exhibit 6.
okay.
Jumping right into the haystack.
Exhibit 6, page 4.
Schedule 4, page 2.
Sorry. Got a lot here. Schedule 4, page 2. Okay. I'm
All
here.
right. And so as I understand this schedule, this shows the calculation of under recovery based on the test year. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
Okay. And I'm just focusing on this page 2 allocation where you're allocating the under recovery among classes. And it looks like I'll focus my questions on industrial, the industrial class, since that's who I represent, but just focusing on that column, it looks like the under recovery is roughly 230 million of the total. Am I reading that correctly?
That's correct.
So the portion of the roughly $1 billion of under collection that would be allocated to the industrial class is roughly 21%. Is that right?
That sounds about right.
Okay. All right, thank you. So if you could turn to page 6 of your testimony.
And is that my direct testimony?
I'm looking at your direct. I don't know that it matters. So
Okay. Okay, I'm there.
okay, so up at the top, you show that, and again, this is the original proposal, which is a roughly 18% increase on customer bills based on the Duke's original proposal, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And this is the impact and impact on the average bill across all customer types after factoring in the proposed fuel rider increase, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then the table down below, you are breaking down the fuel factors which are proposed. You've got a column, or excuse me, a row for the proposed fuel factor. And again, this is the original proposal. And you compare that to the existing fuel factor. You see that for the industrial column?
I do.
Okay, so comparing the proposed to the existing, you've got roughly 3.4 cents per kilowatt hour against the existing, which is roughly 2.4 cents per kilowatt hour. So just focusing on that increase over the existing fuel rider, that's about a 43% increase in just the fuel component, correct?
That sounds correct.
Okay, so if you just, all I'm trying to do is isolate the fuel increase component of the overall rate. And just looking at the fuel component, what was originally proposed was basically a 43% rate increase for industrials.
I can understand how you form that conclusion.
Okay. All right, now, with respect to kind of the overall perspective in viewing the proposal here, we've talked about this being an average 18% increase in bills. Given that it's an average, the experience for individual consumers will obviously differ based on the consumption of electricity, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so for example, a high load factor customer, which is energy intensive, their actual experience with respect to the increase will be higher than 18%.
Can you repeat that?
Yes, so just thinking again with my industrial consumer hat on, if you're a high load factor industrial consumer, you're you're kind of maxing out your peak usage. You would expect that the actual increase on the bottom line rates which are paid is going to be higher than 18%, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, because you're using more
That's-
power. Okay. And did Duke do any economic impact analysis of kind of the effect on jobs and investment of the magnitude of the increase that's sought for industrials?
As far as a specific analysis, we have not. I mean, we did maintain a position where we kept the equal percent increase across the board this year.
Yes.
But as far as a separate calculation, I have not, and I'm not familiar with one.
Okay. Now, the proposed fuel rider increase is actually there's two separate components. There's a base component, and then there's an experience modification component, correct?
That's correct.
And the EMF component is what's used to recapture the under collection, the roughly $1 billion under collection from the test year, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. This may be outside your purview, just feel free to tell me if it is, but help me understand the relationship between the proposed base rate element and the current rate case, which is pending before the commission. Are they going to be one and the same, or what happens there?
Like you alluded to, that is not in my view. I'm strictly focusing on the fuel case, so I'm sorry I don't have an answer for you.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. And with this also may be outside your purview, but with respect to, I did not see an actual calculation of, assuming that the proposal is adopted by the commission, what the revised rider would look like. I know that's typically a step which takes place after the order comes out. Am I correct that I didn't miss that in the filings anywhere, did you? You've not actually proposed what the rider would look like.
So in my second revised rebuttal, I actually do propose what the rates would look like if we utilize this EDIT mitigation option.
Okay, and I'm actually talking about the rider itself, the new rider itself.
The new rider,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
And would you calculate the new rider by essentially taking the two factors, the sum of the two factors? I know that there's a regulatory fee issue, but just setting that aside, take the two factors, sum them up, and then you subtract the base element and rates. Is that how you, just roughly speaking, is that how you calculate what's in the rider?
Can you repeat that?
So you're comparing the adjustment from the fuel case
Mhm.
to the element which is embedded in rates going forward, the base element that's going to rates, and you net that out, and
That's right, an increment or decrement, yes. Mhm.
Okay, all right. So if you would look at Exhibit 2, and again, I'm in your direct testimony, Schedule 1. So I think the second page in your exhibits.
Okay.
So I'm seeing here on row 3, this exhibit is showing, I believe it is test year expenses. Is that correct?
Am I looking at the right thing? Line 3,
Right.
Right.
I'm on Clark Exhibit 2, Schedule 1, page 1 of 3.
page 1 of 3, I'm sorry. Page 1 of 3, okay, go ahead.
Yes, and so I'm looking at line 3, which is, as I understand it, basically the fuel costs associated with your gas units for the test year. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So that's about $1 billion.
Yes.
Okay, so just comparing that to the magnitude of the under collection, I mean, Duke missed, and it's under collection by pretty much the entire year's worth of fuel costs for its gas units.
I understand what you're saying, but I will say that the way the period is calculated in order for us to recoup our costs, we're always forward-looking. There's a projected prospective period and an EMF or true up. So I can understand your assumption that I can understand why you're saying that we missed, but that is a portion that's built into recovering our fuel costs, looking back at the EMF and seeing what we missed.
Yeah, okay. I'm just looking at the figures here, and you're seeking to recover basically $1 billion through the EMF. And it looks like that's pretty much the gas spend for a year. I mean, that's a pretty big miss, isn't it?
I would say that during the 2022 period, you'll see in Swez's testimony, he talks about the volatility that we experienced. So that is one of the components. It's also, when you look at 2022, about 8 months of that was from a fuel filing that was approved in 2021. The remaining 4 months were approved, the rates were approved in 2022 filing.
Okay. Looking at the agreement and stipulation, which was just handed out, and I'm just looking at this now. So,
Bit more.
thank you.
Thank you.
I will try to do that. So I'm looking at the stipulation, which was just handed out. And I see on paragraph 1 that there's a calculation for the impact for a residential customer using 1,000 kilowatts. I don't see a similar calculation for industrial customers. Have you got a similar calculation for the net effect for industrial customers?
Subject to check on this new stipulation that was just given, but I would anticipate it's about a $30,000 increase to our industrial customers or impact.
Okay, so that's, do you know what the, what size of customer that you're modeling the 30,000 impact on?
Give me just a moment. That would be on a typical kilowatt hour sales of about 5 million.
Okay. And we're talking kilowatt hours.
Correct.
Okay. And in your, so I've read the stipulation, and I understand that the Duke and the public staff have agreed to a longer recovery period for the under collection. And I believe it was your rebuttal testimony, Ms. Clark. There was another option that was proposed, which was to use EDIT to offset some of the under collection. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And is that still a viable option for the commission to consider from Duke's perspective?
I think as you'll see in my exhibits, it was really important for the company to show kind of what that impact would be if we were to offset it from the EMF that we have currently in our exhibits. But it's also important to note that this is a settlement that we entered in with public staff, and we do value settlements. And so we understand that in order for this to kind of become unraveled and be applied to this fuel EMF, we would have to gain alignment, and at this time, we do not have that.
Okay. So from what I hear you saying is from Duke's perspective, it's still an option, but the public staff would not agree to use of the EDIT for this purpose. And so that's why it's not in the settlement agreement. Am I hearing you correctly?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. That's all I have. Thank you.
Good afternoon, DC Conant, appearing on behalf of CPRE. Has the company calculated what the rate impact would be if it were to use the EDIT mitigation proposal it recommended in rebuttal, in addition to the 16-month recovery period stipulated by the company and public staff?
As far as the equal percent method is concerned, we have not grouped EDIT and the 16-month together. But if you look at just using EDIT to offset the EMF, the increase across customer classes kind of decreases from 17.98, which I lay out in my settlement, to 11.54, which I discuss in my rebuttal.
And has the company calculated what the rate impact would be if it were to extend the 16-month recovery period stipulated to between the company and the public staff to 24 months instead?
We have not. We have not entertained that. The company has credit metrics that we need to uphold. And Chris, I would probably open that up in case you have anything else to add as far as why we've only looked at the 16-month ending in recovering by 2024, December 2024.
Yeah. The extending beyond 20, out to 20 or through 24 months, it's got a pretty detrimental impact to the company's FFO to debt credit metrics. I lay out in my rebuttal testimony, the importance of trying to recover this full balance by the end of 2024 is a very important date for the measurement of that calculation. And so happy to answer questions about why that's so important, but the fact remains that, the $1 billion, the $998 million that we have on our balance sheet today had detrimental impacts to our credit metrics at the end of 2022. Moving beyond 2024 as a recovery period perpetuates that issue to the end of 2023 and potentially beyond. And that's a position that the company can entertain.
Great, thank you for that. And know that CUCA's counsel had asked.
Excuse me for 1 minute. Is your microphone on? We're having a little trouble hearing you.
Is that better?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Sorry. I know CUCA's counsel had asked about applying the EDIT balance to the settlement as discussed. And you had answered that the company and the public staff had a settlement already for the EDIT funds, correct? For how the EDIT funds were to be used, and that's why it wasn't included in this settlement in this proceeding.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, sorry. Let me say this a different way. There's nothing in this stipulation that would prevent or preclude the commission from ordering that the EDIT proposal contained in the company's rebuttal testimony be utilized as an additional mitigation strategy on top of the 16-month mitigant stipulated between the company and the public staff, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. No further questions.
Just a couple questions for me, and I'm going to be focusing primarily, or exclusively, I should say, on the partial stipulation and settlement. So as you noted previously, per the partial stipulation and settlement, recoupment of the EMF balance or under recovery would be done over 16 months as opposed to the statutory 12 months. Is that right?
That's correct.
And I think you stated this on the stand earlier, which was helpful. This 16-month period would span from September 1st, 2023 through December 31st, 2024. Is that right?
That's correct.
All right. So at this point, the parties have not filed any information in this docket, at least, that directly shows the bill impact of the settlement agreement if it were to be approved by the commission.
That is correct.
Okay. And of course, the settlement agreement is not going to address any potential future under recoveries in any future proceedings. Is that right?
That's correct.
So it's possible that customers could still be paying for the under recovery from this proceeding and then be required, if there were an under recovery, to pay for that under recovery as well.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, sure. So it's possible that customers could still be paying for the under recovery that's resolved by the settlement and then be required to, at the same time, pay for a potential future under recovery in, let's say, next year's DEC Fuel Rider proceeding.
That is correct.
Okay. No further questions.
No questions, thank you.
Redirect from DEC?
No redirect, thank you.
Okay. So I have one question in regard to the partial stipulation. And on page 1 of the transmittal letter dated May the 31st of 2023, the very last sentence states that the application of interest in this matter effectively serves as a proxy for the additional financing costs that the company will incur as a result of the extended recovery period, though this does not necessarily reflect the company's actual additional financing costs. In the rebuttal testimony, I believe you stated that the DEC was not seeking recovery of the financing costs. Can you explain whether that is still the same under the stipulation as well?
Yep. So under rebuttal testimony, we were laying out the EDIT offsetting EMF. So we were not seeking anything additional from customers as far as an interest component goes. But as the settlement evolved, delaying the recovery to 16 months, the company felt it necessary to kind of recoup a portion of the cost that we've been holding on our balance sheet. And Chris, I'll open that up in case you have anything else that you would like to add from that.
No, I don't think so. I think, the only thing that I would add there is, the 4%, that's part of the settlement. That's not our actual true financing cost. That's a settled number. So we use the word, it's a proxy for, but it's, holding $1 billion right now is substantial to the company. There's a burden there that over the course of the year, we started accumulating these costs in 2022. Here we are now at the end of May of 2023. We're still incurring those financing costs to date, but over the 12-month period, we were not seeking recovery of a substantial burden that we're carrying today. If we were to extend for 16 months, we thought it fair to try to just get some carrying costs for that incremental period.
The incremental period, meaning that additional 4 months, is that correct? Or for the entire 16 months?
So the way we've laid out this interest component is we've laid out the EMF over 12 months and what we would normally recover straight line versus what we would recover spanning it out 16 months. And every month there's a difference of what we collect, and that difference has interest applied to it.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. Questions from the commission? Commissioner McKissick.
Yes, following up on Commissioner Cameron's question. So, the way I read the settlement agreement, there's this $6.65 million in financing costs, I'll refer to it as, or the interest that's the 4%. Is that the totality of what you would seek to recover? Or, because I heard it testified, and it's of course in the settlement, that the true financing cost is a number that's greater. Am I understanding that Duke is not going to seek to recover the difference between that 6.65 million and the true financing cost at some point in the future?
That is that is exactly the intent of this, is that it would be, that was an estimate from when we laid out the 12 versus the 16 month. And at the end of that period, it'll be what it is. And yes.
Okay, just wanted to clarify to make sure that was what I was hearing and reading. And in terms of bill impacts, it would be great to know what bill impacts might likely be. Do you have any numbers that you can share with us or project at this time?
Yes, I do. So I actually have the exhibits and work papers that I used to produce this settlement.
That would be excellent if you could share that information. I think it's highly pertinent.
Yep. So we would, for residential customers, our rate would be 3.8950. For our general service, making sure you're ready, would be 3.5020. And for our industrial, 3.2422.
And how does that compare to what it is currently? I mean, in terms of the.
Yep. So in my settlement, I lay out that the increase shakes out to be about 17.98%. When you look equally across all customer classes, this impact from the settlement agreement would yield a 13.31% increase.
Thank you.
Yep.
Questions on commission questions?
No questions from the public staff.
Okay. Looks like no questions on that side of the room. Questions from DEC?
Commissioner, no questions, but would like to make sure that Ms. Clark speaks to the settlement agreement so that we can lay the proper foundation to move it into the record.
Okay. Please go ahead.
Okay. Ms. Clark, do you have a copy of the stipulation which you just spoke with about to the commission?
Yes.
Can you do me a favor and you look through all the pages of the settlement agreement?
Okay. Just look through.
Yep.
Okay, validation.
Yep.
Okay.
Confirm it is the complete partial settlement agreement. Without focusing on the cover letter, just the body of the partial settlement agreement.
Yes, and I did take a look at this.
Okay. So you're familiar with the
I am.
settlement agreement? Okay.
Mhm.
Were you involved in preparing
Yes, I
settlement
was.
agreement? Okay. And is there anything that, from based off what you're reviewing, appeared to be the settlement agreement which we entered into with public staff?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. At this time, Commissioner Cameron, I'd ask that the partial settlement agreement be marked as Special Exhibit 1. Special Exhibit 1, if that's
Okay. It shall be marked as DEC Special Exhibit 1.
yeah. And at this time, I'd also ask that we would introduce Special Exhibit 1 into evidence. If there's no objection.
Seeing no objection, DEC Special Exhibit 1 is admitted into the record. And I believe that DEC has some additional motions to make for these
Yes.
witnesses.
At this time, I would move that Ms. Clark's direct supplemental rebuttal, corrected rebuttal, and revised rebuttal exhibits and work papers be moved into evidence.
Seeing no objection, they are admitted into the record.
And I'd also ask that the company's application be moved into the evidence if there's no objection. Okay.
Seeing no objection, the application of Duke Energy Carolinas LLC pursuant to GS 62-133.2 and North Carolina Utilities Commission Rule R8-55 relating to fuel and fuel-related charge adjustments for electric utilities filed with the commission on March the 1st of 2023 is admitted into the record.
Thank you. And I'd also ask Commissioner Cameron that Mr. Bauer's rebuttal testimony and exhibits be moved into evidence.
Seeing no objection, they are admitted into the record.
And at that time, that concludes the company's direct case. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I believe that the only additional witnesses that we have are for the public staff. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, okay, Mr. Freeman, you may proceed.
Thank you. Public staff would call Ms. Yang, Mr. Brown, and Mr. Lawrence, please.
Good afternoon. I'll begin by swearing you in. And if you can place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hands. And do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you. Ms. Zhang, if you could please state your name and business address and who you are employed by.
My name is Fan Zhang. I'm a public utility regulatory manager in the electric section of the public staff accounting division. My business address will be 430 North Southburg Street, Raleigh, North Carolina.
Mr. Brown, if you could provide the same information.
Sure. Sure. Daryl Brown, my business address is 430 North Salisbury Street, Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm a public utility regulatory analyst with the accounting division of the public staff.
Mr. Lawrence, if you could do the same.
My name is Evan Lawrence. I'm a public utilities engineer with the public staff's energy division. My business address is 430 North Salisbury Street, Raleigh, North Carolina.
Thank you. Ms. Zhang and Mr. Brown, just pull it right up to y'all so everybody can hear you. Don't be shy. On May 9th, did you cause to be filed joint testimony consisting of 7 pages and appendices A and B?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
And do you have any corrections to your testimony?
No, we don't.
If you were asked the same questions as set forth in your pre-filed testimony, would your answers be the same today?
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence, on May 9th, 2023, did you cause to be filed testimony consisting of 29 pages, Appendix A, and 4 exhibits?
Yes.
And some of that information is correct. That is confidential, correct?
Yes.
I
believe it is all correct.
Do you have any corrections to your testimony?
I do have one correction to make. On page 4 of my testimony, beginning on line 17, I erroneously included the W.S. Lee combined cycle plant as one of the plants where there was a what I consider to be a preventable equipment failure at. So my correction would read, beginning on line 16, that sentence should be, however, for the test period, McGuire Nuclear Station and Blues Creek Steam Station had outages caused by preventable equipment failures.
Thank you. If you were asked the same questions as set forth in your pre-filed testimony with that correction, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Hold the microphone up close.
Yes, with one exception. After reviewing responses to a data request received on the company's rebuttal testimony, which I received late Friday evening, I do have enough information to make a recommendation on the Blues Creek outage discussed in my testimony, which began on April 22nd, 2022. I do recognize that parties would not have had a chance to review and respond to this. So I plan to, as I stated in my initial testimony, I still plan to file supplemental testimony on this issue as soon as possible.
Thank you. Presiding Commissioner, at this time, I move that the pre-filed joint direct testimony of Ms. Zhang and Mr. Brown be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand, and further move that appendices A and B of the joint testimony be marked for identification in the same manner as they were when pre-filed. I also move at this time that the pre-filed direct testimony and appendix, pre-filed direct testimony and correction of Mr. Lawrence be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand. And I further move that Mr. Lawrence's Appendix A and Exhibits 1 through 4 be marked for identification in the same manner as they were when pre-filed. And I would note that some of his testimony is confidential.
Your motion is allowed. The joint direct testimony of Ms. Yang and Mr. Brown filed on May the 9th of 2023, consisting of 7 pages, and appendices A and B will be copied into the record as if marked orally from the stand. The direct testimony of Mr. Lawrence that contains confidential portions, it was filed on May the 9th of 2023, consisting of 29 pages, and 1 appendix will also be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you.
And in regard to the exhibits, I'll go ahead and state that the exhibits 1 through 4 of Mr. Lawrence's testimony will be marked for identification purposes as pre-filed.
Thank you. Presiding Commissioner, these witnesses are available for examination.
Okay.
CPRE has no questions.
Approach with the exhibit. Good afternoon, panel. Marcus Trathan, representing CUCA, handed out to you what is intended to be a demonstrative exhibit. I'd like to mark as CUCA Public Panel Cross Exhibit number 1.
The documents shall be so marked as CUCA Public Staff Panel Cross Exhibit 1.
Okay, so what I'm trying to illustrate here is a historic review of fuel rider cases for DEC going back 17 years. I've provided the docket numbers and the years and a summary of the over collections and under collections, and then totaled them up at the bottom. Do you see that?
Yes.
I'm not sure who I'm asking, so feel free to, whoever should best respond.
Yes, we saw it.
Okay, thank you. And I have provided the panel backup for all of these numbers, and so I've have them annotated with exhibits and highlighted the relevant numbers from each of the orders corresponding with these entries. I'm happy for you to look through that if you wish. But if otherwise, I'd just ask you to take these numbers subject to check.
Yes, subject to check. It appear that's the number.
Okay.
What, if I may ask a question about this, I see on this front page, each different case is labeled 1 through 17, and we've got 1 through 17 numbers, tabs within this. I'm assuming that the tabs are that order.
Correct.
That case.
Yes. So if you want to look at tab 17, you should go directly to the $327 million number. You want to do that and just verify? It's probably on page 5 or 6.
Yes, we see it.
Okay, thank you. But you're willing to accept these numbers subject to check? It's in the dockets.
Yes.
So what this illustrates, again, subject to check, that over the last 17 years, the total under collection reported by DEC has been $797 million. Will you accept that subject to check?
Yes, yes, we do see it. We saw some years with over collection and some years with under collection.
Yes. And the magnitude of the single year of under collection sought is roughly $1 billion in this case, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so wouldn't you agree that the magnitude of the under collection here substantially exceeds the magnitude of any prior year, according to this table?
Based on the table, yes, but given the portfolio of the fuel costs as well as the price on the natural gas, I think you will see the up and downs each year. So it depends on.
So I see that there's obviously volatility, and sometimes we're over collecting, sometimes we're under collecting, but there's nothing close to $1 billion on this table of under collection, is there?
Yeah, if based on the table, yes, it appears this year it will be the biggest number over these 17 years.
Now, the public staff has conducted an investigation in this docket, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, are you aware of any prior year with an under collection which is approaching $1 billion?
No, I'm not.
And I will add to that, this, while, I in no way like this, and we've worked.
Let me interrupt for a minute. Can everyone pull the microphones a little bit closer to them because we're having some trouble hearing back here?
I will add that in the 2022 DEC fuel case last year, I was up on the stand with Dustin Metz, who was also, we filed joint testimony in that case. And, we have talked about specifically in that case, but in previous cases, fuel cases, that this was coming. And, we had kind of a perfect storm of events happen for the DEC case between when that case was filed and when and how much the prices increased. So, I think I have in my testimony in this case a quote from last year's fuel case where we were saying that we could see increases upwards of 10% of, or impacts of upwards of 10%. So I do agree that, this is a substantial under recovery.
Okay. And Mr. Brown and Ms. Zhang, in your testimony, you recommend that the company look into all possible mitigation options. I assume that you're also encouraging the commission to consider all possible mitigation options to ease the burden and the shock on customers of this under collection?
Yes, we would.
Okay.
Subject to any given parameters that our settlements already in place. We're not encouraging the commission or the company to pursue those because those agreements have already been stipulated, if you're referring to the even.
Okay.
I'm sorry, can everyone hear me now? Okay, thank you.
Can you repeat your response? We had trouble hearing it from the commission as well.
If you could repeat your question.
Yes, so I was referencing your testimony on page 7, where you recommended the company to look into all possible mitigation options. My question was, would you also recommend that the commission consider all possible mitigation options to ease the burden of this under collection in terms of rate shock on consumers?
Yes.
Okay. And I want to ask you some similar questions that I just asked the Duke panel. So you probably heard those questions before with regards to impact on specific customers. Again, I'm representing industrial consumers, so that's the focus of my questions. As regards to settlement, I understand that the anticipated average increase under the settlement would be a 13% rate increase. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and would you agree that a customer's actual experience in terms of the overall rate increase will depend on how much energy they consume?
I agree with that. This is the charge is based on a per kilowatt hour basis. And I discussed that in my testimony somewhat on page 24, the difference between rate classes and even customers within those rate classes, how large of disparity there can be between the individual customers.
So the example I gave before in the industrial setting, a high load factor industrial customer would expect to experience under the settlement a higher rate increase than the 13%, correct?
On a total bill amount, but not on a per kilowatt hour charge.
Okay. So just to take some numbers, if you've got an industrial customer that's paying $1 million a month to Duke, the extra 13%, just say that they're an average customer, it'd be an extra $130,000 per month that they'd have to pay under the settlement agreement. Is that correct?
That sounds correct.
Okay, so it's about 1.5 million a year under the settlement, just if you've got $1 million a month customer.
That does sound correct, yes.
Okay. Now, in Duke's rebuttal testimony, it offered a mitigation option of offsetting with EDIT funds, correct? That was an option they put out there.
The company, yes, in the supplemental rebuttal testimony, they offer the EDIT. Yes, that's correct.
So if the commission were to combine Duke's proposal with the public staff settlement, that'd be less of a rate shock than under the settlement, correct?
I don't think you would take it that way because the settlement is a settlement. It involves a negotiation among different aspects, different issues, combine them together. So you just, what you're trying to do, you just reopen the settlement and then to ask for the edict to be included. So that's not the settlement. At least
No,
at this point.
it's not the settlement. I understand that. My question was if the commission were to issue an order which essentially combined the two, it would be a better result for consumers, would it not? It'd be less of a rate shot for consumers.
No, remember the edict is the part of the settlement in the last rate case is already the known refund to the customer on the following years. So you can't just get one piece from elsewhere and then put it on here as considered as a mitigation. So those already known to the customer and set it on the settlement. And the settlement at that time is the give and take on many issues. So you can't just peel one piece and then reopen that settlement.
And to add to that there, at this time, the EDIT rider is in effect. It's currently suppressing rates. That money is being flowed back to customers. And so if you offset it to fuel, there's going to be an increase to other costs elsewhere. When you silo it out like that, it can make it look good, but you have to consider the other resulting impacts that are being experienced as well. And I'm not sure at this time if I have not, but I'm not sure either witness Zhang or Brown has that, really looked at the resulting impacts to base rates that would come in. They might be able to add some more context to that.
As I said before, I want to add on, just as I said before, remember it is a give and take as part of the settlement in the last rate case. So it's already a known refund to the customer. And if you bring that into this fuel, that means you need to reopen the settlement. But remember, the settlement is a give and take on many issues. So you just peel one piece. That means you just complicate everything going forward.
So I hear you saying that the public staff doesn't want the commission to do that. Do I hear you saying that you do not believe the commission has the authority to offset the undercollection with EDIT?
Okay, I'm not a lawyer, so I will refer to our legal team to answer your question on that one.
That's perfectly fair. Yeah, perfectly fair. I just want to be clear as to the limit of what you're saying. So, so that's one option, at least from our perspective. Another option would be, in terms of mitigating impacts on consumers, would be to extend the repayment period. Now, I understand you've got a stipulation with Duke, and I'm not asking you to testify contrary to what's in the stipulation, but just in terms of the theoretical world, that is one lever that could be employed to mitigate impacts, would be to have a longer payback period, wouldn't it?
Yes, and I discussed that in my testimony at some length.
And Mr. Lawrence, this may be your question because it's in your testimony, but are you familiar with the Dominion fuel proceeding from 2014, where the commission approved a 2-year payback period?
I am not.
Okay. If I can approach. So I just ask if the commission would take judicial notice of this order from docket E22 sub 515, Dominion proceeding.
Mr. Tracy, can you state that again? Judicial notice of,
This is order approving fuel charge adjustment, docket number E-22 sub 515, dated December 18, 2014.
the commission will take judicial notice of that order.
Thank you. Mr. Lawrence, if you will turn to page 5 of that order and you see paragraphs 15 and 16 of the findings of fact.
I see that, yes.
You see a $16 million under collection in finding of fact 15. And then finding of fact, I might have said 16, finding of fact 15, and then finding of fact 16, it's appropriate to accept the company's mitigation proposal to have rates established to recover 50% in 2015, 50% in 2016. Do you see that?
I do see that.
Okay. And did I understand you don't have any independent knowledge of this proceeding?
I do not.
Okay. All right. And do you have any knowledge of a Duke Energy Progress fuel proceeding from 2018? Excuse me, 2008?
Very limited knowledge of that case.
If I could approach. I don't. No. I would ask that the commission take judicial notice of an order approving fuel charge adjustment, docket E2 sub 929, dated November 14, 2008.
Commission will take judicial notice of the order and docket number E2 sub 929 dated November 14th, 2018.
Thank you. Mr. Lawrence, is this the proceeding that you're familiar with?
Very limited knowledge of this proceeding.
Okay. If you look on page 3, finding of fact 7, in this case, it looks like there's a $203 million under collection. Do you see that?
I do.
203 million. And if you just flip to the next page, do you see reference to a settlement agreement which would extend repayment over 3 years?
I do see that.
Okay. All right. Well, the order will speak for itself, but I mean, there is precedent in North Carolina for a longer payback period for fuel under collections, is there not?
It has been done. I will say that while I don't have the settlement agreement in front of me on this case, typically when the public staff enters into settlement agreements, it's my understanding that part of it is that they don't set precedent because we can see that single 3-year recovery period there that we've agreed to, but right now I don't have the other parts of the settlement in front of me to see. I'm not sure what may have happened there. So
sure, understood. Fair point.
I'll agree that it's happened before. Yes.
Yes. Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
No cross from SACE.
From DEC?
Yes. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Lawrence. I just have some questions for you. I note from your qualifications and experience that you're an East Carolina graduate. Congratulations. I'm a graduate there, but I think our degrees are 50 years apart. So I want to be careful with questions. I note that you graduated in 2016 and then you came to work with the public staff in the same year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And would it be safe to assume that you have never worked for a utility at a power plant of any type?
That is correct.
So have you ever worked have you ever observed an outage at a major coal-fired power plant with regard to the turbine work at a power plant?
Sorry, I'm trying to think. I know the public staff does site visits to different areas, one of them being the power plants. And we do like to go during outages to see that type of information, but that would be the extent of my experience there.
Have you ever observed an outage on a turbine at any of the major power plants on the Duke system?
Yes.
Which one?
At I believe the Wayne County CC, I believe it is.
That would be DEP, I believe.
We were there fairly recently. There was an outage there where there was a turbine removed. I believe there were others, but right now that's the only one I can think of.
Okay. So in your testimony with regard to the outage at Belews Creek 2, which that outage started, I believe, on March 17th in 2022, is that correct?
Yes, that's what I have in my Exhibit 1.
And that was a planned outage as far as you know, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you've taken issue with the fact that that outage was extended by 16 days. Is that correct?
Yes.
So first of all, it relates to some foreign material that was discovered inside the turbine. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And do you know when that material was discovered? What date?
I believe I have the specific date in front of me, but I know it was during that planned outage that began on March 17th.
Would that discovery have been on April 1st of 2022? Does that sound correct?
Are you referencing the discovery response or the discovery we
Yes.
sent for that response? That seems correct.
Okay. So, so at that time, the company had made a decision that they would have to remove the shell that protects the turbine. Is that correct?
At which time? Sorry.
When the foreign material was detected?
Yes, that is correct. They found through a routine inspection, found the foreign material lodged in the turbine and made the decision then that it needed to be removed.
How long did it take to remove the shell?
To remove the shell itself.
Yeah, so they could start working on correcting the problem.
Let's see if I have that in my discovery responses. But if you know of the discovery response that it was in, you can point me there. If not, then I'll look.
Yeah, I don't have a reference to a discovery response. But I do believe it took at least 1 month to remove the shell. Does that sound correct for you?
Subject to check. I would accept that.
Okay. And the outage was originally contemplated to end on April 24th. Is that correct?
I believe, subject to check, I would accept that.
And as a result of the discovery of the foreign material and the correction of that, the outage actually was completed on May 8th, which would be the 16 days that you reference in your testimony.
Well, so this unit, May 8th, it came online for about 2 hours. So similar to how there was a planned outage and then an issue discovered. After that outage, then during startup, there was another issue discovered. So it looks like that, there was a string of outages that ended May 12th. For a few issues.
And that's the 16 days that you reference in your testimony?
The 16 days is I believe April 22nd through May 8th for that one.
Yeah. Okay.
One instance, not the preceding outage, but either the outage before or after.
So do I understand that you've been critical of the company not providing adequate and timely responses to the data requests that were submitted by the public staff and presumably by you since you were working on this investigation?
I wouldn't characterize it that way. I believe the data requests that were submitted in this case, the company has been responsive to the, one of the concerns I have is about a standing, I believe it's been characterized as a standing agreement that the company has with the public staff. We have that same agreement or at least a very similar agreement with this company, DEC, Duke Energy Progress, and Dominion Energy to provide documentation related to outages because of the amount of time and complexity that outages involve for investigation.
Was there anything different about this test year compared to previous test years with regard to that information?
No, but I am not sure that is not part of the problem. I can't testify as to what was not received. I know that I did not get outage documentation in some cases the past few years. I do remember I look back and last year at least there was nothing provided, but I can't say that nothing should have been provided.
Have you ever complained to the company about the lack of receiving information in prior cases?
I believe this agreement has had a few iterations, it's my understanding. And so me personally, I would say no, but I would also say that the public staff has had conversations with the company to adjust the documentation given as necessary. And I believe that this may be one of the cases that it is necessary.
Do you recognize that there's a difference in the manner in which the company reports outages with regard to the nuclear units compared with the fossil units?
I do realize that, yes.
So looking very quickly at the timing of some of your data requests with regard to the outages or the data requests that you submitted, DR7 related to the Blues Creek outage. Is that correct?
It was related to Blues Creek outage was discussed in that DR as well as WS Lee.
Yes. And you submitted that, the company received that on March 27th and provided answers on, I believe, April 10th. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And then you also had some follow-up in your data request on April 20th with regard to Unit 2 at Blues Creek. And the company actually responded, and there were 34 different data requests. The company actually responded in 7 days. Is that not correct?
I believe that is correct.
And then you also followed up with data request 23, which was submitted on April 24th. The company responded on May 2nd, which is 7 workdays. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe that's correct. And, I appreciate the company's responses on those. And we were, at that time, the dates you gave, our testimony was due on May 9th. So we were really trying to finish our investigation into those outages at that time and trying to get information that we needed to come to a conclusion.
And I gather there's some concern about the fact that you weren't able to get some meetings with the company personnel, SMEs, to talk about these, which in the past the company and the public staff have engaged in. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And I did discuss that in my testimony, and I realized that there were scheduling conflicts which do occur.
And the company did attempt to offer times when they were available to have those informal discussions, which are not actually formal data requests under the discovery process. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
You did follow up with the company's rebuttal, the last rebuttal filed by witness Flanagan with your data request number 30. And at least 6 of those related to the Blues Creek outage. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct, yes. About the number is what I'm unsure about, but subject to check on the 6.
Yeah. And did you learn anything different in those responses that you didn't have before with regard to the previous data requests?
So those responses and those questions were asked to give insight as to the company's procedures and excuse me. Let me look just to make sure I'm getting this correct here. But the short answer is yes, I do believe that I've learned information.
Okay.
I did learn information through that response.
So you were asked some questions by counsel for CUCA with regard to settlements in other dockets. You referenced the Dominion Energy North Carolina settlement in that particular docket, E22 sub 515. And would you agree with me that the company actually agreed to a settlement? That was a settlement. That was not a commission order dictating that the company should recover the fuel at a period longer than the statutory period set forth in GS 62133.2. Is that correct?
So again, I don't have any more knowledge of this case than what I've read right here, but in in that order, ordering paragraph 16, it says that it is appropriate to accept the company's mitigation proposal to have rates established in this proceeding to recover 50% of the test period fuel expense under collection in the 2015 fuel year and 50% in the 2016 fuel year without interest. I don't see in here that there is mention of a settlement.
But that's a proposal that the company set forth. That was not ordered that the company had to do that, the way you read that. Is that correct?
That is correct, that it does appear that the commission accepted the company's proposal.
Yes.
And the company in that case is.
As the commission might do with the stipulation in this case.
Yes.
And also a mention was made of the Duke Energy project progress docket E2 sub 929, 2008. And that was represented as a settlement over a 3-year period, was it not?
Yes, that one I do know was part of a settlement that was reached between the company and the public staff. I'm not sure. I do see that there were a number of other parties included in that settlement.
You probably see my name on that order too, if you look at it. That was there. So no further questions.
And Mr. Freeman, before we begin, how long do you think your redirect will be?
A few minutes, 20,
Okay.
15.
Okay, we have, we'll go ahead and take a short break. We have scheduling constraints because some of the commissioners need to be at a hearing this evening. So we're going to try to get through the hearing today. But let's be back at 3:25 and we'll move through as quickly as we can and try to get this done so the commissioners can get to their hearing. We begin, Mr. Freeman, with your redirect examination. I want to talk a little bit about the plans for the rest of the afternoon and the scheduling. We have two commissioners that have a scheduling conflict that are going to have to be leaving. And so I first want to check to see if any of the parties will object to the commissioners who have to leave reading the transcript of the proceeding in which they are not present for.
No objection from Duke.
No objection from the public staff.
No objection from SACE.
No objection.
No objection from
Okay.
SIG for 3.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no objection from any of the parties, we'll proceed in that way. Also, we are not planning to go into tomorrow, so we are planning to continue with the hearing, and let's be very, let's work hard to ask the questions that need to be asked, but we are planning to finish up by 5 o'clock today. So we will be done this afternoon, and we are not going to be going into the hearing tomorrow. With that, Mr. Freeman, you may begin.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Lawrence, you were asked about some outage reports, and I believe that you received an outage report about the W.S. Lee outage, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you received one about Belews Creek outage.
I received a root cause analysis report for the Blues Creek outage.
Did you receive those from the standing agreement?
No, I did not.
How did you receive them?
In the public staff data request 7, I had requested a number of types of documents relating to those outages, and I had asked that question as a check. I had believed that I would have received outage reports in response to the standing agreement we have, which asks for outage reports. So I was honestly a little surprised to receive the documents in response to that question.
Is that when you first had an inkling that the standing agreement wasn't capturing all the information you thought it was?
Yes, that's correct. I didn't know before then that the question needed to be asked, or that we were not receiving or may not be receiving what we had been expecting through that agreement.
And that was in April?
I asked, the data request was sent in April, yes.
Okay. Y'all were asked several questions about EDIT mitigation. If we took the EDIT money that is currently being flowed back to customers, we took it out of the settlement, out of the rate case, and put it into fuel, what would happen to the fuel, to the base case, the minute that happened?
Base rates would increase
Right away?
right away, as soon as it's implemented. As soon as it's implemented, base rates would increase.
Okay. And in the future, what would happen to rates when the EDIT is no longer available to suppress rates?
Rates would increase.
Was EDIT an obligation that existed before this fuel case was filed?
Yes, it was.
And if EDIT is pulled out of the settlement and into the fuel case, would it skew how it's allocated versus in the base case now versus how it would be allocated under this equal percentage in the fuel case?
Yes, the flow back would be skewed because of the equal percentage allocation methodology as opposed to how it's allocated in the base case rate case.
Okay, thank you. Do we support the settlement in the settlement that caused EDIT to exist? Do we support that?
Yes, we do.
Do we support the settlement in this case?
Yes, we do.
Are we in favor of reopening old settlements or this settlement?
We are not.
One moment, please. Thank you. I don't have any more questions. And I apologize. We narrowed it down after I told you that.
Mr. Freeman, you narrowed it down significantly.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll begin with a few questions, and I think my fellow commissioners have some questions as well. And all of my questions are going to be directed to you, Mr. Lawrence, and they're not related to the specifics about the outages that I think Mr. Kaler asked you some questions about. It's more about what you thought you'd be receiving and didn't receive. So that's kind of the focus of what I'm going to be asking. And you talked about the agreement between the public staff and DEC related to the monthly power plant performance reports. Is that what the agreement relates to?
I am not completely sure that it's in relation to that specific requirement. It may be specifically for fuel to receive those outage reports because, as I said earlier, these outages take a long time to review. They can be very complex, and it can be receiving the information, the outage reports, and the information we expect at the beginning of the case. We can still have issues to be able to complete our investigation and our testimony within the confines of the case.
And can you be very specific about what you and the public staff believed you should be receiving or would be entitled to receive under that agreement that you did not receive? So what specifically did you expect to receive pursuant to that agreement?
So, as Mr. Kaler asked about before, I realize there is a difference between nuclear documentation and everything else. Nuclear has stricter standards and more reports are provided. So, I'm not expecting, I wouldn't expect an outage report to be provided for every single outage. In our DR8, Public Staff Data Request 8, we asked about how many outages there were, duration, what plant. The response they gave us in the test year, there were over 420 outages. So I absolutely don't expect a document for every one of those. However, for the nuclear outages, we do receive what are called either root cause analysis or root cause evaluation reports. So if the plant goes offline, there's a problem, there's an investigation completed, and there's a report completed for that investigation. We receive that documentation. In this case, in the Data Request 7, there's been talk about the W.S. Lee outage report. That one, the standing agreement asks for outage reports specifically. That one, the title of the document is an outage report. That is completely one that I would have expected to be provided. The root cause analysis reports or root cause evaluations, so RCA or RCE, those, I could see that the company would believe that they may not be, just giving the benefit of the doubt there. However, I don't see how an outage report, a document titled outage report, could not be in response to an agreement asking for outage reports.
So that's helpful. And just to make sure that I'm clear on which investigations the public staff hasn't completed or provided a recommendation for, it looks like it from your, please tell me if I'm correct, it's for 3, the Blues Creek Unit 2 outage on April the 22nd of 2022, and then the following outage on August the 31st of 2022, and then the W.S. Lee outage. Are those the only 3 that you have not completed your investigation and provided a recommendation?
That is correct. Or there are some outages we don't look at. These are the ones that I've started an investigation into, and really want to be able to complete that investigation and provide the commission with those results. Some of the outages we looked at, we didn't feel there was enough there to continue it. So of course, I'm not asking for those to be left open, but those are the ones three you just mentioned are the three, especially that the WS Lee outage, because it relates to, that plant was offline in 2 test years. It was offline during Winter Storm Elliott when we had significant issues with, our power quality across the state and rolling blackouts. So, I would also caveat that by saying that, I don't want this case to determine the outcome of our investigation into that M100 sub 163 docket, where we are investigating the events during Winter Storm Elliott as well.
And then to make sure I understood your testimony about the supplemental filing that you talked about that the public staff is going to be making, which outage would be the subject of the supplemental filing that you said that the public staff would be able to complete the investigation as soon as possible and make a supplemental filing? Which one was that?
So at this time, the April outage at Blues Creek.
Okay.
Let me check. Make sure I get the dates correct here.
Yeah.
So the outage beginning Blues Creek Unit 2 beginning April 22nd. At this time, based on information received on Friday, this past Friday, I would have enough information that I would be comfortable making the recommendation. And so that one, I do plan to immediately start drafting and filing to file testimony. The Blues Creek Unit 2 outage in August, I am currently, working on questions and drafting a request if the company would not object to the response at this time to hopefully finish up my investigation in that very soon and be able to make a determination. So the April outage, I'm ready to start drafting my testimony now. I have the information. The August outage, I am still getting what I believe to be the last bits of information that I need, and would be filing testimony as soon as possible. Does that answer your question?
Okay. And just to make sure that I'm clear about how it's going to work from a procedural standpoint. So the evidentiary hearing will presumably be finished today. You'll be providing a supplemental report or supplemental testimony. Are you asking that your recommendations be deferred till the next fuel proceeding, or to be incorporated so that your recommendations in regard to the April 22nd, 2022 outage and the August 2022 outage, what will you be asking the commission to do, to consider it in this fuel proceeding or in the next?
Well, I believe I would be, of course, open to whatever the commission preferred that approach be.
Okay.
I don't know exactly when I could have my investigation and testimony done for that second Blues Creek outage, and of course for the WS Lee outage. That one has other events that are making it much more complicated than just an outage investigation would normally be. So I believe for the April outage, I could have something filed before the end of the month. And I realized that rates for this case the rate period begins September 1. So, I believe beyond that, we might be getting too late for this case. And I'm not sure I could comply with that deadline in this case for that August outage.
Okay.
Well, Commissioner,
yes.
could we reserve a right to object to any supplemental testimony until we see it? We're not aware that there's a procedure to allow supplemental testimony in this proceeding, so we would reserve the right to object to any offering of any supplemental testimony by this witness.
Yes, you may reserve the right to object.
Thank you.
Yeah. And one last question about I think DEC witness Flanagan took some issue with the fact that the investigation and recommendation had not been completed and said that the public staff had had ample time to send additional discovery to obtain the information that you needed. Can you just respond to that that testimony and statement from witness Flanagan?
Yeah, yes, I can. And, you know, I can, from the outside looking in at what we do, I can absolutely see why that statement would be made. However, I believe that it is incorrect, partly because of what I discussed earlier about the timing of receiving documents. So I received the documents to this data request, which I did not expect to even exist, in mid-April. And, or let's see, the 10th, I believe, was when one of them, there was an issue with one document for the Blues Creek outage, the RCA. So it was a few days later. And so the, you know, for those outages, they can take 3 or 4 data requests to really understand the issue, to really feel like we have an ability to make a recommendation to the commission on those cases. And, you know, typically there's a 10-day window for responses. So, you know, we can be just waiting for 30 to 40 days in a case. When I send that DR in April, not expecting to receive that documentation, you know, we're already, this case was filed in late February. We have a testimony deadline May 9th, and one more data request, another 10 days on top of that, which I believe in this case it was actually 7, which the company complied with and agreed to. And, you know, I am very thankful that they did that. But even 7 more days just waiting here, we can really quickly start to be pushing up against deadlines to be able to prepare and provide testimony. And that's why that standing agreement is in place, is for this very purpose. And, you know, and why we have the informal phone calls with the technical staff to receive information to really narrow down our scope, because those phone calls are immensely helpful. We have them every year with the nuclear staff, and it narrowed, you know, an hour-and-a-half phone call, we can narrow down our investigation, and it takes away 100 questions or more that we have to ask. And unfortunately, in this case, we weren't able to do that. We received information later than what we expected, and we, you know, this wasn't the only case, of course, that we're working on. As you guys are very well aware, we're all very busy otherwise on top of this. So I don't feel in this case that even given the company's responses to the data requests and the time that that we asked for and the time they did, that I was able to really complete my investigation. So.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. That's all the questions I have. Let me check with the other commissioners to see if they have questions. Chair Mitchell.
Just a quick question for the panel. In the stipulation, I'm looking at, do y'all have the stipulation in front of you, settlement agreement? Karen? Yes. So I'm looking at page 4, paragraph 3 in section 3, it's in the resolved issues. Discusses the April 2023 fuel forecast. What can you all tell me about that issue? There was testimony provided by the company in rebuttal, it was actually a revised rebuttal testimony, explaining that an error had been found in its forecast and it had corrected that error. But can you help me understand sort of the impact of using that. Why did you all settle on using on the April 2023 fuel forecast? Let me just ask it that way.
So I'm not really sure about the air, but there are advantages to using a more up-to-date forecast. Of course, the one that was filed, and let's see. Right.
Well, can you help me understand what those advantages are?
I'm trying to make sure that this is actually, we had several discussions on which forecast to use, but I'll just say in general, if I believe this is comparing to the as-filed forecast. So, the difference between January versus May is this year they did their initial forecast a little bit later than normal to help with the maybe fuel volatility that may have occurred. We just have a 5-month later forecast. So the billing period hasn't changed, but we're 5 months closer to it. So it's just a more accurate forecast at this point based on, things that we, maybe weather and customer growth changes that may have been made between over the last 5 months. So, we just felt, I believe it's just a little more accurate, so a little more appropriate to use for this case.
Okay. That's all. Thank you.
Mr. Lawrence, I want to be sure I understood the import of the correction you made to your testimony at the beginning of your direct testimony. If I understood the correction correctly, the import is to say that we should take away from that is that the public staff does not now take the position that the December outage at WS Lee was preventable. Is that correct?
That it was preventable. That is correct, because at this time I have not been able to complete enough of an investigation to make that statement. I am not recommending that any other part of my testimony be changed, including where that investigation be left open, and that I cannot say one way or the other for that outage at this time.
I'm glad I asked for the clarification. It's not that you're now taking a position that it was not preventable. It's that you're unable to take any position on the question.
That's correct.
And
Yes.
that was the purpose of the clarification you made to your testimony.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, looks like no additional questions from the commission. Questions on commission questions? Okay, DEC?
Just a couple. You referenced the standing agreement that the public staff and the company has. Is that correct?
Yes.
And does that require a semi-annual type response from the company?
Yes.
And so with regard to WS Lee, you couldn't get any information on the semi-annual since an outage report takes place after the outage is finished. Is that not correct?
Correct.
And this semi-annual or this standing agreement, it's not part of the discovery process in this docket, is it?
No, my understanding is that we have that agreement is to be able to get the information in a timely manner, because if we would send this on the first day of discovery, 10 days later, we'd receive those responses. And, for the issues I discussed about how long it takes and the complexities of the outages, I think all companies that have a fuel case here in North Carolina have agreed to the at least very similar terms.
And as I asked previously, there's nothing different in this case than previous cases that you've been involved in with the company with regard to that agreement.
That's my understanding. However, like I said before, I don't know, though, that means that I've been getting the correct information in the past.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Mr. Lawrence, are you aware of any other times when carryover costs have gone from one fuel rider to the next?
Yes, that has happened in this case specifically, but in past cases, I can't think of a I can't tell you a specific time when it's happened, but when the company has been unable to, create outage reports specifically for a nuclear outage, which may have been late in the test year, and the outage report may have not come available until late in our investigation period. They have agreed to leave that outage open for a future case, for the next case.
Did you say it happened in 1282?
Yes. Last year, as I discussed in my testimony, Clemson CHP had, there was a billing error associated with the steam host, Clemson University. The company and the public staff agreed that when that issue was found last year, it would be corrected and updated in this case. And that was for costs that were in last year's test year, last year's EMF, which were carried over to be reflected in the current EMF period.
If I can have one moment. Thank you. I don't have any more. The public staff doesn't have any more questions. Thank you.
Well, that comes to the end of the questions for the panel. Thank you for your testimony, and you may be excused.
Thank you.
Now I think I will hear motions from the public staff and from CUCA.
CUCA would move admission of its cross-examination exhibit for the panel.
The motion is allowed.
Public staff would move into evidence the exhibits 1 through 4 of Mr. Lawrence, some of which contain confidential information.
Okay.
And the public staff would move appendices A and B from the pre-filed joint testimony of Ms. Chang and Mr. Brown, and appendix A from Mr. Lawrence also into evidence.
Seeing no objection, the exhibits and the appendices will be admitted into the record. And with that, I think that we have heard from all of the witnesses, unless there are witnesses that I'm not aware of. Okay.
Just the presiding commissioner, Kenwright, I believe you already addressed this at the beginning of the hearing, but just to confirm for the record, SIGFR 3 wanted to make sure that testimony of witness Brian C. Collins, consisting of 10 pages and one appendix filed in this docket on May 9th, 2023, is entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Yes, I believe that the order has already addressed that and admitted his testimony exhibits into the record, but in the event that it did not, I will grant your motion and allow the testimony into the record.
Thank you.
So I think we're at the end of the evidentiary hearing. Are there any additional motions or matters that we need to address before the hearing is adjourned? First from the applicant.
No issues. Thank you.
Okay. From the public staff or any of the other parties?
Nothing from public staff.
Okay. Okay, seeing none, we will have proposed orders due 30 days from service of the transcript. And with that, we'll close the evidentiary hearing and go off the record. And thanks to everyone for your work in this case.
Thank you.